and Padmavati Rao to experience this entire dimension to take you with us through the journey. Now we have done a little preparation for it. We wanted you to experience what we've experienced as we've discussed this book over the last few days. We've dressed for you. Yeah, if you noticed, we're all in Tamil Nadu saris that we've begged, borrowed, stolen from different people. And I have to reach out to my friend Padma who lent me this sari. And Padma, I know you're watching me from Bangalore. This moment is for you. Okay, when Shubha told me that I would be anchoring this session, I quickly downloaded this book on Kindle and sat by the window on a rainy day and began to read it. I did not stop reading it till I finished it, which is very rare because in this time and age, on a Kindle, you have 5 choices. If the book doesn't hold your fancy in 15 minutes, you move on to another book. Have you done that? I do it all the time. But this book engaged me completely. It felt like I was in my grandmother's house where my aunts, who were the most fabulous storytellers, were telling these stories. There was a little bit of scandal, there was a little bit of intrigue, there was a little bit, there were so many dimensions to it. And I was so excited to meet the author of the book. So, Bharti, this is over to you now to ask you what inspired you to write this book. But before that, I need to acknowledge someone here, Bharati's daughter. I encourage you to buy the book because it's the kind of book that story that you would hear your grandmothers tell you. Where is Pavitra? Stand up. Can you come here? This is the model in front of the book. Very, very beautiful. This setting could be in the early 1900s. You look stunning here, Pavitra. Yes, it's the first time I'm looking at you. Yes, this is what you look like.
And she's been badgering me for payment ever since. Because I didn't pay her for modeling for the cover.
So, Pinti, what inspired you to write this book? No, before that we wanted to discuss.
Bharti.
Sorry. What? No, actually, Pinti, we wanted you to read a passage on the setting in Tivupatti when the story began.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I think if I would be permitted, I think I'd like Pinti to take us straight into the setting where this novel was set, so that we sort of get drawn into that atmosphere, we get drawn into that surrounding, and we actually feel that we're actually there. And I know Pinti is going to take it to that level.
Okay. So, the chapter is titled Of Oleanders and Temple Bells. Dawn was just breaking, and a dense blanket of mist hung over the Bhagirathi river. All it would take was a quick, hot embrace from the rising sun to melt it down. Then the water would ripple and sparkle brilliantly once more. The river split up and encircled Tivupatti, the island village, before coming together after the village was passed. Pankajam and Shankara Shastri, her husband, lived in the little stone house behind the ancient Shiva temple, on the fringes of the village. It would have been just another nondescript village, but for the temple which attracted devotees through the year. The temple was built on the banks of the river, and uneven stone steps from the river led up to it. The river was home to floats of crocodiles that sometimes lay completely still on the temple steps, sunning themselves. Their stealthy black forms looked deceptively like the black steps they lay on. Stories were rife of devotees who had stepped on them unknowingly and been dragged away, never to be seen again. The temple belonged to Annaswamy Shastri's family. I'll stop there.
tell us what you felt about it, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I know you've been saying that, you know, this is a place where it all began and all of that, but where is this place? Does it truly exist, or where did it come from? I think those were the thoughts that
So, did you actually wonder about where
I
this?
did. I did.
Okay, I don't want to sound pompous, but like Malgudi, Tivupati is a place that does not exist. The Bhagirathi is a river I don't know about. You tell me there's a river by that name in the north. But all of this has come entirely from my imagination. The Shiva temple, the village, the river, everything is from my imagination. So if it actually becomes a part of all your lives, if you read the book, then I would be very happy.
What does Tivupatti mean?
Tivupati, Tivu means island. If Kalyan is here somewhere, he'll probably bear me on that, correct? And Patti means village. So this is the island village. So actually I got inspiration from Srirangpatna, which is an island town, right? The Kaveri. The Kaveri is my muse. I'm absolutely fascinated by that river. So if at all I've taken inspiration from anywhere, it's from the Kaveri. And we saw that song yesterday, which made me feel that I've got the right muse. So it splits up in two as it reaches Srirangpatna and then comes back together. So I sort of modeled this Tivupatti and called it Island Village. In Tamil, Tivupatti.
Bharti, you are from Karnataka, isn't it?
I'm from Karnataka, but Tamilian by lineage. Never lived in Tamil Nadu, but I'm Tamilian by birth.
So
From
the
both
connection.
sides, maternal and paternal. And Tamil absolutely fascinates me. The language, the culture, the food, the clothes. There's nothing about the Tamil culture that doesn't take my imagination away.
Padmavati, what does the Tamil language and the Tamil tradition do to you?
I hold it in very, very high esteem, because I think the Dravidian culture is very distinct from the culture in the rest of the country, especially north of the Vindhyas. And I think the literature in Tamil Nadu is so rich, and I feel like I've been deprived because I don't know Tamil too well, and I wish I could read those texts in that language. I wish it had dawned on me earlier when I was younger, and I would have tried, you know. But I know that the literature is so rich, and the kind of thought is so distinct and different from what we find in other texts in the rest of the country, that I really feel that there needs to be some sort of, bridging. And yeah, that's my fascination with Tamil and Tamil
You
Nadu.
know, for me too, I grew up in Madras in those days. Lived in Singapore where I studied Tamil as a second language. We're not Tamilians, but my mother read Anand Vigadan and Kalki at home and took us for every Tamil movie. So we grew up with a strong sense of connection with the book. So which is why when I read your book and yours, Kalyan, your book too, that looked at Tamil tradition from those times, there is a very, very subliminal connect which actually bonded us while we were actually discussing the book. But there's more to this. What inspired the book, Bharti? What made you write a book as unusual as this? Like I asked you when we were talking earlier, was this based on people that you know? Are these, I mean, this is your first book. Is it autobiographical in any sense, as first books technically tend to be?
Yeah, I think I'll start from the last question. It is not autobiographical. I didn't set out to write a book. My old friend Ujjwala is here. She's been with me through this journey. She knows I've been writing this for 20 years. If you ask me what inspired this book, it was just one image that I had in my mind. This was the image of my great grandmother sitting at the door of her room with her legs crossed and, just across the room, across the threshold. And I was very young. I must have been 10 or 11. She had already lost her memory. She couldn't speak. She would just sit there the whole day. And I would stand at a distance and keep watching her. what must be going on in her mind. And maybe the seed that I wanted to write a book based on this image, not about her, because I knew nothing about her and it was just this one image. So maybe I wanted to, that image was embedded in my mind, and somewhere when I grew up or whatever, I wanted to write about something taken from, give flesh and bones, if you will, to that image. And I'd love for Pinty to actually spell out that image for you, because this is the only autobiographical part, the image. And that was what inspired me, possibly stayed with me through my life, and I wanted to write.
In fact, I have to admit that when I read this part of it, it brought back memories of my own grandmothers, my grand aunts, and how we as children, we held them in our minds and hearts. So I'll get on with it. Um, it's the chapter is titled "Her Two Worlds." Madras, 1969. We all know it as Chennai now, but those of us who've been around on the planet for a while, we know it as Madras still. Rajamal sat on a cane chair that straddled the threshold of her room. Mani, her 8-year-old great-grandson, peered at her from a safe distance, poised to run if he needed to. It seemed to him she had been sitting there forever, and he wondered whether she was nailed to it. Ambuja Pati said Rajamar was his great-grandmother, but Mani preferred to believe his friend Ramu's theory that she was actually a witch who had been sent to earth to watch over naughty children. He feared she would eat him up if he annoyed her too much. Rajamar was a bit strange. She rambled and muttered under her breath very often. Mani worried for her. He had seen her eat. Her hand haltingly found its way to her mouth and pushed food into it. Age had claimed Rajamar like a relentless warrior. Her skin was now a dry, brittle expanse, almost like autumn leaves that can be crushed into powder, and blue veins visibly crisscrossed their way below its arid surface. The oversized white cotton blouses she wore under soft silk. The oversized white cotton blouses she wore under soft silk saris, carelessly draped around her, often slipped off her spiky shoulders. Sparse strands of silver hair on her head were gathered into a little knot. Mani was sometimes seized by the impulse to tug at the wispy tail that was wrung out of the knot. Her feet, usually crossed and stretched across the threshold, were shiny from the swelling in them. Mani inched his way closer to her and nudged her, just enough to make her react. He wrinkled his nose in distaste at the stench of urine that always came off her. He had challenged Ramu that he would determine today whether she was nailed to her chair or not. Just then, Rajamard turned her head towards Mani and looked right into him, as if she knew just what he wanted to do. Terror added speed to his legs as he screamed and ran towards the kitchen, where Ambuja's household was getting ready for another scorching hot day. And he never did determine woman or witch. That's Raja.
That's a very strong imagery to leave us with.
I grew up with this image. So I think that's why it got so strongly embedded in me. And there was this awful curiosity in me that what must her life have been? Was it possible that she could have always been like this? no, there must have been something behind her. So while I think it's somewhat cruel to a reader to begin with something like this, it was necessary. So I begin with this image and take the reader back to many things after that.
Tell us your writing process. How did you write the book?
Oh, yeah. I began, I had this friend who was working in Femina, and I thought I was a great writer, so I just wrote what was not even a skeleton. I just wrote about this old woman who I've imagined she's young and she got married to somebody and she did something and something, some 1,000, 2,000 words, and feeling very proud about myself, I took it to this lady thinking she's going to immediately send it for publication. And she didn't reply to me for a week. After that, she comes back and says, I still have her handwritten note with me. She says, you know what, there's a great saga in this. Even if it takes you 10 years to write this book, please get into it and expand it, which was a very polite way of telling me it's not worthy of publication. But it was also a very telling way of telling me that, don't waste this story. There is something here. There is something here. And I said, who will take 10 years to write a book? I actually took 20 years. I started it sometime in the 90s, and then I shelved it, and then I started it again, and then I shelved it. And finally, when, I realized that it's never going to become a novel, in, one lot, I'm not going to be able to write it. I actually began serializing it on my blog and then putting it onto Facebook. And there were these 50 readers, unfailingly, including Pam, Ujjwala. I can see all of them in the audience. Unfailingly, every week, these 50 readers would read it. And if I did not put it out one Sunday, the very next day I would get messages on Facebook. Where is she? We're waiting for her. Where is Rajamal? So in 24 weeks, the book was ready. And I said I took 20 years, and here all I had to do was use Facebook. So I had this live audience that was reading along with me and urging me to write this or write about that or bringing up moral dilemmas and this and that. And there it was. And then finally I decided, okay, there's something here. One fine day I pulled it all off my blog, went on to Amazon. I was too impatient to find a publisher. I just copy-pasted the whole thing into Amazon, did a final spell check, and I said, okay, now it's out. Now let it find its own journey, and here I am. And I think this is the right time to thank Shubha that she saw worth in actually giving a wonderful platform like this to a self-published author. I can see another trustee here. Thank you, ma'am, that your trust has
I think they
actually
deserve an
done
applause
something
for this.
so bold.
I think, yeah, absolutely.
And if this becomes a trend, then it really augurs well for authors who have good content but cannot find the publishers, because the publishing industry is totally different today and there is no place for fiction in the publishing industry.
We actually have background music to our panel. We're very extremely lucky. You have an acknowledgement to one more person you had mentioned your.
You want me to do all the acknowledgements? Okay. Another person I want to acknowledge is my grandfather, Dr. M.V. Gopal Swami, who founded Akashvani in Mysore. And I'm really, really proud that he actually, in his own little way, put Mysore on the map of India in a manner that can never go away. So I'm absolutely grateful to him and grateful to the city of Mysore that it gave such a warm welcome to a person who was a born Tamilian, did not know how to talk Kannada, and made him somebody who still remembered. Even today, even an auto driver in Mysore, if I talk to him about my grandfather, he remembers. He knows. So that's the kind of legacy. And they don't know it yet, but I want to thank Padmavati. I just called her one day and said, I've got this offer from the Mysore Lit Fest, and I'd like you to read my book over there. She hadn't even read the book then. She just said, yes, okay. And after she read the book, I mean, her happiness was 4x, so I'm very, very touched by that. And Rugmani, same thing. I hadn't even met her before this. And she was so excited. I thank her for pushing me so hard. Read the book again. Tell me which passages you want read. She just kept me on my toes for the last month or so. And finally, of course, my daughter, who's still insisting I must pay her for modeling on the cover. I don't think she's ever going to get it, but that's okay. I'm still going to be able to do the reading.
Yeah, but let's just enjoy the music and
They're not
savor
going
the
to give us
discussion.
extra time.
They're not going to give us extra time. No? So we'll do both. Music is really a background to what the book is about anyway. It is from the same tradition. So, and for those writers out there, if you're looking for another way to put your work out there and get your feedback, Facebook. When Bharathi told me that she'd serialized it on Facebook and was getting regular updates and response from her readers' excitement. I mean, this is probably the most dreamlike situation for any writer to be able to get instant feedback week after week after week. So, if any of you are wondering how to get your book out there and you want feedback, if it's your first book, try it. I would try it. I think it's a very brilliant idea. In all the how to write a book books that I've read, I've never heard this before. So this is something very new for us. So Bharti, now directly into the pages of your book. Your book is very layered. Lots of situation, lots of people, lots of fascinating insights, a lot of emotion, a lot of sensitivities, a lot of deep understanding of the psyche of men and women. What brought that out in you? Where did you go within yourself to get this kind of layering in terms of human experience?
All through my life and career, I think I've been I don't want to tell you what my daughter calls me, but I've been a very serious person. I never kind of see the lighter side of life, relationships, emotions, everything just gets to me. And when I began writing this book, I didn't want it to be a frivolous, going from one incident to another. While I wanted to tell a fascinating story, but it had to sound real. It had to touch the heart, which I hope it does. So when Rukmini is asking me about the intensity and the emotions, one of the emotions that I've dealt with at length is grief. Why did I pick up on grief? It was not a conscious decision. But as a storyteller, when you start telling a story, grief is somehow such an important part of our lives. It's so important, but it's not given enough importance, when we think about it like that. There's something that brings on grief, and then we cry and wail, and then we don't go deep into it. But it sits within us. It sits. And each of us processes it differently. In my book, too, every character, we won't give away the characters, but if you remember, every character has gone through grief. And this is the grief brought on by death. There can be different kinds of grief. Grief because of monetary loss, grief because anything else, your house, something happened, there was burglary, I don't know, whatever it is. But this is mainly grief that comes out of death. So how do different people process grief? And is there a right way of processing grief? Is there a wrong way? So just to give you a little glimpse, grief can even be mitigated by desire, physical desire. So if you come across somebody who's reached out intimately to another person while he or she is in grief, how would we judge that person? Does that person become characterless? When you're in the utter depths of sadness, the warmth of another human can actually be catharsis, can actually be help you to heal. But what does society think? Will society call you immoral? oh, this husband had hardly died a month ago, and she had a relationship. I'm not going to give away who did what in the book, but there's another person who has similar grief and does two things. He or she wants to be left alone all the time. And there are people reaching out to that person saying, I want to be there for you. But no, this person wants to be alone and takes to self pleasure. If we were to use a stark word, masturbation. So is that again a sin? Would you consider it a sin, whatever your religion? Whether, in many religions it's wrong. So these are the kind of less spoken about things that have been spoken here for people to kind of process. I'm not trying to preach, I'm not trying to change thoughts. This is written about a century ago, not trying to do anything, but just saying that these problems have possibly come down. They're not problems. These social issues, practices, whatever you call it, have possibly been timeless. So they're as ancient as contemporary. So one of the intense emotions which you spoke about is grief. There is another as well, envy, jealousy, which again, all of us are victims of, right? Is there any person here who's never felt jealous or envious? I think envy is a slightly better term, but is there any of us who's not been, nobody has felt jealous?
No, you said never felt
Right?
it. The question you framed was such that it wouldn't raise a hand.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry.
They all agreed with you.
So that was a rhetorical question. Okay. So I'll request Pinti to read out a small passage on envy. And then I'd like us to go into a little discussion on it. It's a little provocative. So I invite a little bit of discussion on it. So shall we go?
Yeah, so it's titled Mother in Quandary, this chapter.
Okay, if you can't hear her well, please tell us.
Is
Because
there
I
a problem?
really expect a good discussion on this.
Can you hear me? Okay. Pankajam was an unhappy woman. The distance between her and Raji had grown so much she didn't have a hope of bridging it anymore. Did she want to? She didn't have an answer to that. Images of a little girl in thin plaits tied with ribbons playing hopscotch by a river often troubled her at night, and she woke up in a sweat. She looked around for the girl and, not finding her, lay awake all night. That was the little daughter she had given away to an aging widower to pay the debts her husband had left her in. Rendered short-sighted by grief and anxiety, she had acted in haste. Raji had been her possession to do what she wanted with. She had not spared a thought for the little girl. What life would she have with him? Was that the only option left to her? These were just some of the thoughts that harrowed her. There was envy in her. When the contrasts in their lives showed up to taunt her. With her limited vision, she had seen Raji settling into marriage, bearing children, and living a docile, uneventful life. She was even comfortable with that vision. What she saw now was a woman who had shattered glass ceilings and battled alone to make a place for herself professionally and personally. She had ensconced herself in the heart of an erudite, mature man who had seen worth in her and nurtured, even ignited ambition in her. And yet, Pankajam was not a bad woman. She had not willed a bad life for her daughter. She had not even envisioned what could be. She was a woman with narrow vision who had unwittingly chosen a larger canvas than she could fill and tried to fill in with specks. Her efforts to color it with the limited palette she possessed had failed. The canvas was like an unchecked river and had cried to be filled with vastness and color and life in all its hues. It had broken free with all the defiance that a river in full flow can exhibit. It had chosen its own colors and left her behind, holding a powerless brush.
What did you feel? Have you ever experienced anything like this in your life before? This intensity of envy by a mother for the daughter?
I've seen it. I've seen it in a very dear friend's life. And very, very conservative mother was unable to allow her daughter the kind of freedom, you know, before she got married, that the daughter would have liked. And when the daughter got married, luckily she got married to a person who would, you know, give her a lot of freedom. And it wasn't about giving it to her. He was with her and very supportive in her exercising her freedom. And the mother was not quite able to take it. And you know, if with your permission, I'd really like to go to, I hope I find it, the passages where you talk about other women and you speak about women down the ages. You talk of Ahalya, you talk of Yashodhara, you talk of Urmila, right? If I have permission, I'll read the whole page. Otherwise, I'll just read only one
Go
panel.
ahead, Padmavati,
Yeah?
go ahead.
So, about Ahalya, Raji says, that's Rajamai, she says, was it her fault that Indira seduced her in the guise of her husband, the great sage Gautama? Why did she receive punishment she did not deserve? Did she deserve to be turned into stone for a sin she did not commit? Her liberation came from the touch of Rama's foot against the stone she had become. Why his foot? Yashodhara, abandoned by her husband Siddhartha Gautama when she was a new mother of a 7-day infant, because he wanted to renounce the world. He left home while she was sleeping. What life did she have after he left her? Did she deserve the hardships she bore after he left? Urmila, Lakshmana's wife, left behind after her husband decided to follow his brother into the forest to serve him. Forced into a 14-year slumber in the peak of youth to help him stay awake to serve his brother. Did she agree of her own volition? Or because she was expected to, as the duty of a wife? My questions are simplistic, Raji wrote. They are not voiced by a scholar. They are not voiced by a woman who wants to rebel. They are voiced by a woman who has seen other women suffer. My questions might cause discomfort, anger, outrage even, but I need to ask them. I need to voice them because I worry that the lives of women were framed by these examples. I beg forgiveness of my readers if my agonized voice sounds impertinent like my mother thinks they do. I need to ask questions that can help the lives of women to become less oppressed. History can teach us lessons. Are we willing to learn them? That's Raji for you.
Padmavati, you brought that alive. You brought that alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I'm just going to go to that part in the book where you write about Golu, uh, Bharati. And so this entire family is getting ready for Navratri, and they've all, every, every member of the family takes another scene, and they're preparing for it. And it's a wealthy family. It's a wealthy Tamram family with a lot of money, so they put a lot of good stuff into making very, very beautiful scenarios. But Raji, the protagonist of the book, she goes into a room and doesn't tell anybody what she's going to do. And then after that, Bharti, I'm going to ask you to continue because this is something very important to you.
Which one?
Golu, about the
Yeah, I'm just
women.
trying to find it. We didn't bookmark.
Yeah, why don't you just speak about it?
Speak about
Yeah, yeah.
So, how many of you have heard of Golu? Golu is a Tamil word again. So, yeah. So, all of you. The 10 days of Dasra, when we have, you know, we display dolls and things and all that. So, this house, they belong to a very wealthy house. The protagonist, she's married into a very wealthy house, and their Dasra, you know, the doll display is very famous across Madras, as it was called then. So everybody's called, everybody comes to it and all that. But this year, she says, I'm going to have my own display, which is different from the rest of the house. So she keeps her room. She takes 2, 3 rooms for herself. She doesn't allow anyone to go in there, and she does her decorations there. And then when people start coming, they go into her rooms, which she had decorated, and they get the shock of their lives. They see widows with shaven hair, but huge bindis and wearing colored clothes and jewelry and everything, but their hair is shaven. And she sees, you know, they see different things like this, which is completely the opposite of you have it? Why don't you?
We just have 10 minutes, so
We have 10
skip
minutes.
this
Oh.
line. You just skip the reading and you can continue.
Yeah. So why did she do this? Why did she do this? Because Raji was, you know, was a bundle of emotions. She was a rebel. She was sensitive. She she wanted justice. She loved justice for women or for the oppressed. Oh, there's only 5 minutes, not even 10.
Yeah, then the point I wanted to make here was while the mother was so envious of her daughter's life, the daughter in turn was fighting for her mother, her widowed mother, who had been
Exactly.
delegated
I think she got it.
into the kitchens to liberate herself. And the angriest person about this Gulu setting was the mother herself. She says, this is inauspicious. This should not happen. So you see how different the mindset of these two women are, and the way that she's brought it out in the book is so heart-touching. She's brought it out to the imagery, the emotions, the sensitivities, and the two worlds. She actually calls it the two sides of the house.
The other side.
The other side of the house. On one side there is the protagonist, and the other side there is everyone else. Yeah.
So I think the point here is that, you know, when you saw these widows with shaven heads, but everything else, she was making a point, like Rukmini said, about what is being done to my mother is unjust because her mother was with all that. And yet the mother is, you know, against what her daughter is doing. So again, are women their worst enemies? That's a question. It's a cliched question, but it comes up again and again. We need to look at it. I mean, I think as a closing point, and I know we're running out of time, but as a closing point, what we need to leave this thing with is that are men really the kind of villains they've been made out to be? Or does a lot of the blame lie with us? Do we, as women, have the guile? We need to look into ourselves and see how much of our lives is being manipulated by men or the other way around. Are we playing chess all the time? And there's a lot of reference to chess in the book. And I think we women are expert chess players. We're really good at manipulating things, whether it's in the bedroom or the kitchen or wherever it is. Men are maligned much more than they deserve to be. This is my belief. It's not because there are a lot of men in the room. It's my, I'm not trying to appease you.
No, but in the book there is in fact,
One character.
one character who is a man after my heart, and when I read it, I said, "My God, they don't make them like this anymore," you know.
Or they don't ever make them like this.
No,
But this is a man who is sort of portrayed the way I believe men are, because I was married to a man like that. That's another maybe autobiographical part, and I apologize for that. It's crept in. I can't help it. But I do emphasize with strength that men are a maligned lot, and we women must stop behaving like becharis. We have, we have it in us to get our way all the time. And the poor men are so thumbed down, and they don't even talk about how they're being treated, except as a joke. But we need to take this seriously and really examine this. I believe this. And if there's one message I want to leave you all with from my side, it's this.
Does anyone have a question? We have time for one question. The men can pat themselves at the back. Is there a question here?
In any society for that matter, the values which dominate, the values of those who dominate, they prevail. And therefore, women internalize the values of a patriarchal system. Perhaps there is the answer to your question. In fact, a man may be actually ill-treated by his own wife. There are such examples, no doubt. But generally speaking, the dominant values are absorbed and followed by everybody. One example, I don't know whether every Russian wants to do what Putin is doing, but I cannot understand, even now, like in the days of Hitler, everybody is following Putin without questioning. So that is
What
the
is the
principle
question?
of domination.
What is the question?
No, this is the observation. Observation is the answer to her question, whether actually we women are ourselves not responsible for this kind of manipulation and all that. The point is, they just imbibe and internalize the values of the dominant patriarchal system. That's my observation.
I think your observation is
Absolutely.
But that's what we need to change. Yes, right? We need to change that. Yeah.
I think we're done now.
I have a question.
You want to take the question outside?
It's not a big one.
Okay.
I'm a part of the book club, and all these 2 days I was like, I didn't want to speak anything because I want to just listen. This is the first year I'm just listening like that, otherwise I'd be around.
So we adequately provoked you enough
Yeah.
to make you
Yes,
get up.
yes.
So we've done a good job, girls.
Let me say a few things before I ask this question, because that pretext is necessary. I teach in a college, and my area of specialization is gender studies. So keeping that in mind, ma'am had one passage which she read it that, men are alone and they are happy, and then women are also alone and they are happy, and how do they bridge? There is one, rather I should say, with whatever reading that I've done or the research I've done, my answer was completely different. Whatever result that I have arrived at is completely different. But then whatever that I read it through the book or through the conversation which I heard, I felt there is a more of fictional reality into it, where you grow into a postmodern character, you blow a lot of postmodern identities into the character, because of which you make the story the hero and not the characters, because of which that voice comes into. Otherwise, each one leads a particular perspective.
We need a question.
Yes.
We're still looking
Is
for-
that a perspective that we see when we see these characters being justified, or is that the normalization of any person suffering in that way?
That's a big answer, for which you need more than 5 minutes, which we don't have.
Allah, what I have understood is...
No, actually, we are time out right now.
Okay.
We are very, very time out. So you want to...
Very bad.
I know, it's so sad when you finally got up. It was, okay, so,
Answer it in a couple of sentences, she says.
Yeah, because frankly, I didn't understand too much of the question. But if you're saying, if your question was, are we normalizing the kind of behavior that is meted out to women and give excuses for it? I personally don't think so, because I hold the conviction very close to my heart that it's the men who need to speak up now. You know, I know there are cases of women who are ill-treated, who are, I know that that's there, definitely. So just as we speak for them, we need to speak for the other gender as well. Because I firmly believe this is a very maligned gender. And it's time, when we talk about gender, we need to think about men and women. Why have we made gender synonymous with women? There is not only one gender. Now there are 3 genders. So we need to be more inclusive, and here I would blame the men as well, that you don't speak up hard enough for yourself. You make us into caricatures and say, oh, my wife's cooking was bad. You know, it's not about just making jokes. It's about seriously speaking about the things that you have done, you have achieved, and the good things that you have done by women. It's time for the other gender to really speak up.
bravo, bravo.
Yeah.
Thank
This
you
is
all
really
so
the
much.
one message that I want.
Thank you all so much. You've been a wonderful audience. And please go out and, what do? Buy the book.
And stand in queue.
Okay, this was a very interesting discussion, and it tells us that never give up on your dreams. Keep your dreams alive, however long it takes to fulfill it. On behalf of the Mysore Literature Festival, I thank the panelists and the audience. Books are for sale. Do buy and get them autographed by the authors in the assigned area. Thank you.